I recently played through Portal Revolution, excited to find out what all the fuss was about, and intrigued to discover why it was named Revolution. One playthrough later, I still had no idea. Portal Revolution is a 2024 fan-made mod for Portal 2, which takes place in between the events of Portal 1 and Portal 2, and because I'm a huge Portal fan, I wanted to try it out for myself. While playing through Portal Revolution, I had so many thoughts come to mind that I felt I had to make a video analysis dissecting it. I want to discuss what I think Portal Revolution does right, and why I think the game fundamentally misunderstands both its source material, as well as how to construct a cohesive narrative. Portal Revolution isn't a confusing experience, as much as it's a confused experience. It so often tries to do something in a way that doesn't work, or even more frequently tries to do something without knowing what that thing is, resulting in a disconnected design. I'm gonna go through the game chapter by chapter, analyzing every aspect of its design that stood out to me. But before I do that, I want to make one thing clear. I think the developers of Portal Revolution had their hearts in the right place. I think they tried very hard to make an enjoyable experience, and judging from the overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews, it seems that, to many people, they succeeded. Heck, even I had a good time with the game and found myself genuinely impressed by its design a few times. But, when you try to expand on a franchise such as Portal, that did so many things right, you open yourself up to be judged as another entry in the series. And while I did enjoy my time with Portal Revolution, I think it's a very confused experience. Portal Revolution starts by having you wake up inside an apartment-looking storage cell, similar to the beginning of Portal 2. Contrary to Portal 2, however, you're not tricked for a moment into thinking that this is an actual apartment, as the aperture facility can be seen through large holes in the ceiling. A result of wear and tear, to be sure, it must be, as these storage cells were clearly made to trick the subject into a false sense of security and familiarity. Anyway, suddenly the cell starts moving and the sound design is just off. The large apartment room is emitting a pathetically quiet conveyor belt sound as it's being moved around, which really is not what I expected to hear. When the cell stops, a crane can be seen lowering from above, and rather than grabbing onto the cell, as you'd imagine a crane would, you hear the sound of bolts being screwed, as if the crane is bolting itself onto the holding cell, which makes no sense to me. Thankfully, the sound design does seem to improve when moving beyond the first chapter, but it's a shame that already my immersion has been thrown off just a bit. Also, another minor note, once the cell starts moving again, it stops making noise entirely. Now we're introduced to one of the two voice actor characters in Portal Revolution, a personality core who we later come to know as Sterling, at this point only appearing as the disembodied voice of an announcer. I have a lot of thoughts about the voice acting in this game. William Neal, who is the voice behind Sterling, is definitely a competent voice actor, and it sounds like he gave his all to this project. However, it seems to me that the screenwriter and voice actors lack communication when it comes to what the characters were supposed to be like, because both voice actors throughout the game have a really hard time delivering the lines in a manner consistent with what I think the writer was going for. Let me give you an example. Listen to the delivery of these two lines. The first is spoken by GLaDOS in Portal.
Please be advised that a noticeable taste of blood is not part of any test protocol, but is an unintended side effect of the Aperture Science Material Emancipation Grill, which may, in semi-rare cases, emancipate dental fillings, crowns, tooth enamel, and teeth.
And this is that line parodied in Portal Revolution.
Please be advised that noticeable damage to eyesight is not part of any test protocols, but is an unintended side effect of the Aperture Science Material Emancipation Grill, which in semi-rare cases may emancipate some of the light-sensing rods and cones inside your head.
When I hear those two side by side, I don't just think competent versus non-competent voice actor. Like I said, I think Neal is a good voice actor. Rather, this line works wonders in the first Portal game because it's formal science speak that hides the concerning fact that you might lose your teeth while passing through the emancipation grills, hidden inside a message that otherwise sounds like some boring disclaimer you would read on the back of a pill bottle. It's terrifying because it causes us to wonder what other unknown dangers we're exposing ourselves to by completing these tests, as well as what kind of insane company that would allow their test subjects to experiment using unsafe equipment. And finally, it's also just a funny line when delivered by the monotone voice of GLaDOS. All that is to say that when spoken by GLaDOS in the first Portal game, the line works. Not because it's a good line in of itself, but because it synergizes with and plays off of all these surrounding facts. Now take that same line, alter it a slight bit, and have Sterling say it, and wouldn't you know it, it falls flat. It doesn't work. It's not funny when spoken by Sterling, because he's a way too human announcer who puts in a lot of enthusiasm into every line, unlike both of the announcers from Portal 1 who were both monotone and robotic. Maybe you think this is a nitpick, and again, I mean no ill will towards neither the voice actor nor the screenwriter. But this one parody of a classic Portal 1 line is, to me, a perfect example of the two most dastardly crimes that Portal Revolution dares to commit time and time again throughout its runtime. Not grounding its characters in a solid archetype, and not understanding the source material. Returning to the intro sequence, we look into a mirror at a well-designed player model, confirming that we're not playing as chill, and we're prompted to agree to a very long list of terms and conditions. I waited around for about a minute to see if there was any additional dialogue if you refused to click the button, as this was often the case in Portal 2, but the announcer didn't seem to have anything else to say. This is a good example of a place where I wouldn't criticize the game for not adhering to the traditions of its source material, because to me, this is going above and beyond in a way that definitely added to Portal 2, but was not necessary to include in a mod such as this. It's only when the game misunderstands the fundamentals of the Portal games that I'll feel compelled to argue that it's made a mistake. After messing around with a bulbless wall-mounted lamp that could be turned on and off at strange angles, I finally gave up and accepted the terms and conditions, and I was let out of the holding cell. And oh boy, here we go again. Where do we go once freed from the cell? That's right, straight out onto a metallic bridge with clear view of areas no test subject is supposed to be seeing. Maybe I'm completely misunderstanding what the Portal game was trying to do. Maybe, but I don't think so. To me at least, in that game you were supposed to only see the well-polished chambers and not the rugged industrial outside areas. During the intro sequence to Portal 2, one of my most fond memories when playing with my dad was actually believing that I was inside of an apartment and my mind being blown once Wheatley started smashing the cell into walls, breaking it apart and revealing what had been hidden behind the walls of the fake apartment. But Portal Revolution just lets you walk out onto the catwalks, no problem. This is definitely how it was intended in Portal 2. And before you argue that Sterling doesn't care about concealing the industrial parts of the facility, I agree. He probably doesn't, but as will become clear later on, these catwalks were intentionally made to connect the different test chambers. And unless Sterling designed these himself, which I found hard to believe since he's not in control of the facility like GLaDOS was, the game is depicting this as being how either Aperture staff or GLaDOS designed their test chambers, which I find extremely hard to believe. Anyway, we continue along the catwalk to an elevator leading to an empty test chamber with a door leading to a staircase leading to an elevator leading to the first test chamber. What? Why is it designed like this? Why have the blank test chamber and two elevators rather than just cutting straight to the final elevator? You're not world building because it's just an empty chamber, and you're not teaching the player anything other than elevators go up and doors open. Okay, moving on. Chamber 1. We're stuck behind a pane of glass, and Sterling lowers a button that we have to press in order to prove that our brain is sufficiently operational after a period of extended hibernation, in a similar way to how we'd ask us to say Apple in the beginning of Portal 2.
You will now participate in a brain damage evaluation survey to determine just how damaged your brain is. If you believe your brain is sufficiently operational, press the button in front of you and continue the test.
This is a pretty Portal joke, which is a compliment of course, but there are two problems with it. For one, it's still delivered by the very bombastic Sterling rather than a monotone robot announcer, as was done with the similar jokes in the previous games, which means that the joke once again falls flat. In my opinion, having brought in a voice actor to play a monotone announcer would have worked so much better for these Aperture or cold bastards that don't really care for your well-being as long as you're healthy enough to test type jokes. And secondly, you dare to explain the joke right after you make it.
Very good. Please walk through the portal and continue testing. Your self-reported status is more than sufficient for testing.
Don't say that. It removes any sort of clever punch the joke had. I also tried not pressing the button to see if there were more lines if you refused, but again, there were none. One last note about this part of the chamber is that, while it doesn't compare to the way we're introduced to the portals in the first and second Portal game, it does do a passable job of visually explaining how the portals work by showing us our character moving through the portals. This is the very important thing to show the player, especially if they haven't played any Portal game before. Now we enter another blank transition room that leads us into the second part of Chamber 1. These blank rooms are repeated many times throughout the game when two separate chambers are part of the same test. And while I get what they're going for, not simply having the chambers be right beside each other, which makes sense, some of these rooms really feel out of place to me. I think it's the fact that they're often too busy to feel like simple chamber transitions. I'm sure a lot of you are going to disagree with me on this point, so I'll move on. The last part of the chamber is sweet and simple. It teaches us an important way to relocate the weighted storage cube, that being by calling in a new one. We reach the part where Sterling parodies GLaDOS, and I stare intensely at this water leak, which should definitely have soaked the floor by now. Maybe use water droplets next time, guys? Afterward, we're introduced to the portal gun in much the same way that we were in the first Portal game, although we're actually taught an additional lesson here, which is that both the blue and the orange portal can be used as both entrance and exit. That may sound like a silly lesson for anyone who's played the Portal games before, but it's something we're very subtly taught in the first game as well, and it makes a lot of sense to explicitly show the player early on, as the concept of portals is quite complicated the first time you play Portal. Another joke falls flat.
As a candidate for the Human Emergency Response Team, you are expected to adapt to all dangerous situations, and as such, will not be informed about the device's safety hazards.
And we progress to the next elevator. However, not before once again being intentionally shown the outside of a test chamber, breaking any immersion of a clean, sterile testing environment. We feel intimidated by the large open area. We think, geez, what's out there in the darkness? We don't feel safe. This is not what Portal was trying to do. I digress. In the next chamber, Sterling once again tells a quote-unquote joke that falls so very flat because of his YouTuber-esque personality.
Your performance in the next test chamber will be timed to measure puzzle solving and execution speed during extreme wind and weather conditions. In the rare case that wind and weather conditions appear to be ordinary, please stay idle in the entrance foyer until the desired conditions are met.
Listen, you wrote a cold, scientific character and gave him a booming, handsome guy voice. It doesn't work, and it should have been apparent as soon as you heard the lines being read aloud. Besides, the joke doesn't even make sense. Extreme weather conditions? How are those ever to be simulated in this chapter? This is quirky for the sake of being quirky, and I don't like it. The chamber itself is pretty good though, as it teaches us that we can move through the Emancipation Grill without losing the orange portal, due to us only having access to the blue portal currently. Because it's going to be quite a while before we acquire the orange portal, this is an important lesson to learn. After another strange transition room that really puts me off, having a pointless lift and 2 Emancipation Grills for no apparent reason, we reach the next chamber, which expands on the idea of being able to retain the position of the orange portal when walking through Emancipation Fields. It's a good chamber that poses a slight but appropriate rise in difficulty. Well done. The next chamber introduces lasers and laser cubes, and once again the dialogue falls flat. It feels like they did one take of the voice actor trying his best to improvise a pompous announcer, but in my opinion it just sounds weird. Take a listen and see if you agree.
The next test may contain concentrated amounts of electromagnetic radiation that may be harmful to the retinas of some humans. The Enrichment Center recommends to solve this test with closed eyes, as health insurance will not be provided for this specific exercise. In case the light-sensing rods and cones of your eyes have previously been emancipated by an emancipation grill, feel free to ignore the prior warning.
The chamber itself is good, nothing much to say about it. Another odd chamber transition later, this time serving no purpose as it leads to the elevator anyway, and we reach a chamber that I quite like. It's really simple, but I was stuck on it for a few minutes anyway, until I discovered that you had to use a mechanic that you'd been taught earlier, that being your ability to call in a new cube to replace an old one, effectively teleporting it to your location. But what's missing? Yes, the dialogue. Sterling hints that the weighted storage cubes may be capable of experiencing pain, in what I can only describe as a very millennial way.
Before starting with the next test chamber, we would like to remind you that, so far, no experiment has yet unproven whether or not weighted storage cubes are not incapable of not feeling pain when being emancipated.
The storage cubes, not the companion cubes, which I thought was the hint in the original Portal games, but whatever. The real problem is that I don't know what Sterling's character is supposed to be. By the end of the chapter, it's revealed that he's putting on a show right here and isn't actually an announcer, but rather a janitor, so he must be reading lines from a script? Okay, fair, but who wrote these lines? Again, this isn't GLaDOS tier humor with a clever hint of psychopathy and disregard for human life, it's quirkiness for the sake of quirkiness. And that's misunderstanding your source. It's dialogue like this that makes me so tired of listening to Sterling by the end of the game. Anyway, moving on. You may be starting to think that this game has poor writing, but good level design, but the next chamber would beg to differ. It's a very simple chamber that teaches you one thing. You can swap out a cube with multiple uses for one with only a single use to get the more valuable cube in your possession. But even on my first playthrough, I beat this chamber so quickly that it felt like it was teaching the player a redundant lesson. It's such a simple concept, swapping out one cube for another, that I feel like this chamber could have easily incorporated more test elements to spice up the difficulty. Anyway, lesser nitpick. I promise I'm almost done making this point, but just look at this. It's a chamber introduction screen outside of the bloody chamber. Aperture would never build a test like this. You're supposed to be a rat stuck inside of a cage, but here you feel like an employee walking around wherever you please. The next chamber teaches you about flinging yourself through the air, but without the helpful floor graphics of the first game. It seems like a mistake, but I'll let it pass. This is also where I first experienced the very strange music box phenomenon present throughout the game. It seems that somehow the code for playing flinging music at the player's location when they fly through the air was transferred to cubes, And once they go flying through the air, the music never stops, even when they land. So you'll just have a box infinitely playing music that you can carry around. How did this get through playtesting? It is very funny, so I'll let it slide, and instead you can have some footage of me and my brother messing around in the next chamber. I will have to warn you that we're both Scandinavian. Let's get it. Alright.
Hvor spiller den også?
For lidt.
What? What?
Og den stopper ikke engang, når den lander.
What? Det giver mening. Jeg elsker det.
Following this chamber, we once again leave the testing area to traverse catwalks and peek into the observation plateaus of other test chambers. Why? For the heck of it, of course. It's another example of poor utilization of a feature that was used brilliantly in the other portal entries. In Portal 1, once we finally manage to escape GLaDOS, we start traversing the outside areas in an attempt to flee the facility, and now we're actually going inside of the observation rooms of the previous chambers in order to escape. The keyword here being in order to escape, not for the heck of it. In Portal Revolution, you could literally waltz towards the elevator and be done with this section in a few seconds, or you could stay and explore 3 separate observation rooms because, I don't know, it was cool when Valve did it, I guess. It's true, it was, but they had a reason for you going through the control rooms. It wasn't a part of the intended course of the puzzle, but here it actually is. The puzzle chambers are built to connect to the observation rooms. That would be the same as if the jail cells in a prison were built to connect straight to the guards' offices. Why, Second Face, why? Also, take a listen to the sounds of the toxic goo in this chapter. Gross. The next chamber is yet another example of poor voice line delivery from Sterling.
Well, that's definitely wrong. Give me a second.
You would never put the emphasis on definitely in this sentence, except if you weren't prepared for the line. Did you not have the time or money for retakes? How about this one?
Good. That faceplate is now properly calibrated.
So now Sterling's projecting his emotions towards the faith plate? He almost sounds like he's communicatively challenged in some way, where before I got the impression that he was very extroverted. I keep asking myself what Sterling's character is supposed to be, and I feel like I'm getting a new answer every time he speaks.
So that's why there are holes in the ceiling.
Funny. But what? Why would the faith plates be calibrated like that? Is it an error? Because you do need the downwards momentum to complete the test, so riddle me that one. The next chamber is quite good, even if the weighted storage cube is included just to artificially increase the length of the test without making it more difficult. You've also probably already noticed, but lasers have no collision and deal no damage in this mod. This is very convenient for some puzzles, but to me it does seem like a lazy solution, as the lasers can still overheat and destroy turrets, just not you for some reason. Also, as with flung cubes, the laser dispensers play music. Why not? At the start of the next chamber, Sterling says this.
Rest assured that unlike your fragile human tissue, all Aperture Science equipment has been built to withstand temperatures of up to 4,000 degrees Kelvin.
Whoa there, bucko, why so malicious? Why would you be? Because with the only exception of GLaDOS and Wheatley, which both had their personal reasons, the personality cores in the Portal games have never shown to be inherently hostile toward humans. And Sterling's anger is never really elaborated upon. This feels like yet another contrived motive being glued onto Sterling's already mismanaged character. The transition room leading into the next chamber feels much more natural, probably due to its extremely short length and uninteresting design. I like this one a lot better than most of the others. And then, the big reveal. Sterling's not actually an over-enthusiastic / evil / autistic robot announcer, but rather a nerdy personality core who's been fooling you the entire time. He claims to have intervened before you were baked, meaning that this test track must have been built by GLaDOS, as I don't believe Aperture Science was straight up killing its test subjects before she took over. Before explaining to you what is actually going on and why he needs you, he signs you up as a janitor so you can avoid any security measures you might pass by during your ventures. This is actually a neat idea, as you could imagine Aperture having security outside its chambers, but since it never played a role in either of the previous Portal games, it does seem a bit strange to add here. Your title as janitor is revoked during the later part of the game, apparently to explain why doors won't open for you in old Aperture, but I feel like this could have easily been explained away as the old systems being faulty and not working, rather than you having to become janitor and then losing your privilege. In any case, it's an inoffensive design choice, so I'll leave it be. After becoming janitor, you ascend in an elevator, and that's the end of chapter 1. After the elevator ride, we're forced to wait inside this room as Sterling explains that he needs us to restart a machine that can help rebuild Aperture Science. It's been no more than a few minutes since I became janitor, but apparently this door didn't get the memo because I can't open it. So much for that plot point, I guess. Anyway, we move through the facility as Sterling casually hints that our children are dead, and we make it to a short puzzle that involves us having to find a weighted storage cube to block a laser so we can progress past some fans. I didn't realize this at first, but you can actually climb the ladders here, which you couldn't do in the previous Portal games, although climbing them can be quite janky. Once we pass the fans, we watch this neat sequence where another huge fan activates and blows some turrets aside so we can continue onwards. Not long after, we have to use these bombs, also seen in Portal 2, to break through a whole bunch of glass walls to progress. The bomb dispenser emits a very repetitive ticking noise, and in a hilarious twist, even though Sterling warns you not to get yourself killed, I actually could not figure out how to die to the bombs. Even after a direct hit, my screen only went red for a few moments. Besides the annoying ticking and the fact that this part is a little too long for my taste, it's not too bad. The final puzzle in this chapter is phenomenal. If you think I'm too hard on this mod, I promise you I'm not trying to be, and here I can truly say that I was impressed. It took me quite a while to solve, even on my second playthrough, and it doesn't achieve difficulty by hiding test elements in obscure places, but simply by requiring you to execute a few specific steps in a certain order, using knowledge you've acquired earlier on. It's a really well designed chamber, and I had that aha moment both times once I finally solved it. The last thing we do before the end of the chapter is reach yet another elevator, where Sterling talks to us once again. I don't want to comment on every single instance of mismanaged dialogue in this mod, but since so many of the voice lines missed the mark, I feel compelled to at least comment on some of them. And yes, I know this may sound hypocritical coming from a guy who constantly makes grammatical errors when he speaks. I promise they weren't in the script, but here's the thing. I'm not critiquing the writing and voice acting in order to make fun of the developers. On the contrary, I want them and every other game designer to make the best games they can. And so, I point to where I think the intentions were good, but the executions were not, giving the most genuine feedback I can.
Surprise! What? What's that look on your face? Did you expect something bad?
I think the writer was trying to imply that he'd set us up to think Sterling would betray us here, but I wasn't expecting anything bad, and so this felt a bit off. Could just be I missed some implication in his dialogue earlier though.
Yes, it's an actual elevator straight to the surface. Rare find. You're welcome, by the way.
I think I could spend 15 minutes or so talking about this line of dialogue alone and all of the problems I have with it, but I'll try not to. Firstly, I'll address the writing. Saying that an elevator to the surface is a rare find doesn't make any sense to me. Why would a way to leave the facility be hard to come by? I assume the employees of Aperture Science had to leave pretty regularly back before GLaDOS took over, so the only reason this line would make sense to me is if the writer was implying that GLaDOS actually closed off most of the exits to the surface once she took over Aperture, or because the writer thought it made sense in the head of a player who has already played Portal 2 and knows that only one elevator is used to bring us to the surface in that game. We also have no way of knowing that this elevator will bring us to the surface when we first see it, so the fact that Sterling assumes that we can somehow know that just by looking at it seems like an error in writing. In regard to the delivery of the line, this is a great example on how to make a character annoy you rather than sounding like he's up to something devious. Although the intentions behind Sterling's character remained ever elusive to me, I think the writer's trying to make us feel like we can't trust him. But the delivery of this line doesn't make him sound malicious or scheming, just very, very annoying. Cartoonishly so even. It makes me hate this character, but for all the wrong reasons.
Look, I know what you're thinking. You really don't trust me. And I've done nothing but sounding like a raving lunatic or a sociopath. Probably both at once, if I'm gonna be honest.
The way he says, or a sociopath, so seductively is just comical. Neil definitely did something weird with these lines, but I'll defend him by noting that he didn't have much to work with. This dialogue is just strange and frankly poorly written.
I'll try to help you where I can with these old test chambers, but there's been a lot of decay, if you catch my drift.
There's no drift to catch here. It's just as he said, the chambers are old and decayed. And finally...
But hey, look at the bright side. There's fresh air, it's sunny outside, and I think there's a cool breeze.
That delivery, man. They must have been in a real hurry to get this mod out. Once we step out from the elevator, a door opens in front of us and we're greeted to a beautiful view of the outside world. Portal Revolution does areas like this one very well, and I think it's the game's strongest aesthetic. Sterling then notes that we have to find a testing track to move through rather than simply treading the catwalks, because the chambers were built to be more durable and as such are less likely to collapse. It's a creative way of explaining why we have to do more tests. coming out into more open areas, and I just want to give props to anyone who's worked on the visuals of this game, because in the aesthetics department, Portal Revolution gets up there and competes with Portal 2 in terms of quality. The designers really make you feel like you're out in the open air, and coupled with the calm music and sound of birds in the distance, it all just blends together perfectly. Once we pass through an overgrown Portal 1 chamber, Sterling says this.
Did you know that this iteration of your Aperture Science handheld portal device has been specifically configured to not shoot portals further than 8 kilometers? Yeah, they quickly learned to limit the range on these things. Can easily end the whole world if you put a portal on the sun.
Delivery aside, I can't see how the sun could have made a portable surface, so this line doesn't make any sense. Then we reach our next batch of original chambers, some of which are really good. This first one isn't much to speak of, but already in the second chamber we're introduced to a really interesting way of utilizing your only portal. You have to shoot the blue portal on the ceiling, go through the orange portal, then as you fall, relocate the blue portal to the ground below you so you're flung out of the orange portal. It's so simple, yet this chamber had me stumped the first time through until I realized what you have to do. Love it. Okay, listen to this dialogue.
Oh, I just realized. You don't even know how this all happened. Well, long ago, Aperture was run by a central core capable of monitoring and maintaining the whole facility. Certain tasks were outsourced to other cores, like me. Everything was great, you know? A true utopia. Until one human test subject, this little monster, just had to ruin our lives and killed her. And that's that. Most of my colleagues either went crazy, died, or disappeared. What else were we supposed to do if we can't fulfill our purpose?
I understand that we're hearing the story from Sterling's perspective, but there are just so many things that don't make sense or that I really just don't like about this retelling of Portal 1 and its aftermath. Sterling notes that we don't know how this all happened, as if Aperture had fallen into decay purely because Chell destroyed GLaDOS in Portal 1, and in no part due to the fact that GLaDOS killed every single employee in the facility apart from Redman. Everything was great, he says, not until GLaDOS killed everyone, mind you, but until Chell destroyed her? Is Sterling just a heartless bastard who doesn't care about human life whatsoever, and such had no problems with GLaDOS killing everyone as long as testing could continue? It doesn't really make sense to me. Also, why would Sterling be so warm towards GLaDOS when she's just a human having been scanned into a computer? None of this dialogue stands any scrutiny. If it had been me designing Sterling's character, I would have just made him a conscientious personality core who was obsessed with rebuilding the facility, GLaDOS having been just a part of that plan rather than a pillar of worship. Also, just the fact that Sterling refers to Chell as killing GLaDOS seems strange to me. It felt like GLaDOS only phrased it like that in Portal 2 to make Chell feel like she was a monster, rather than it being the common way you refer to cores being destroyed, as if they were killed. The next chamber is a bit too repetitive for my liking, as it makes you have to repeat the same gameplay piece 3 times, first by placing some gel in the right spot, then by collecting a storage cube to place on a button. Afterwards, we're introduced to a new puzzle element. But before we get to that, this part you're being shown right now reminded me of something I'd been wondering about for quite some time. Where is Sterling? Right here when the light turned on, I really expected him to appear on a rail as Wheatley often did in Portal 2, but he doesn't. Sterling's only seen at rare intervals, and I presume he's following us behind the scene when we don't see him, but he also has controls over part of the facility, as later he's moving around some plates to allow us to continue forward. He also has the ability to talk to us as if we were talking through speakers, which is something it seemed only the core who was in charge of the facility could do in the previous games. This may sound like another nitpick, but it just didn't sit right with me when I played how Sterling always seemed to have just enough influence over the facility to where he could help me along and speak to me whenever it was convenient, but never enough to do something actually useful like help me complete the tests. Alright, well back to the new puzzle element, the cleansing field. It's a liquid dispenser that basically acts as an emancipation grill for gels, and although it's a fine new addition, it's never incorporated into a puzzle in a way that blew my mind. Another shot at Sweet Chamber later, and Sterling says this.
I'd love to help you solve the puzzles, but even after watching hundreds of people solve and hurt themselves in these chambers, I still don't get it. I'll just stick to maintenance if you don't mind. All about the simple things.
In his video on Portal Revolution, Al's Alpaca makes a great argument for why it feels strange to have Sterling say this. As Alpaca argues, Valve has already given us an explanation as to why cores can't help you solve puzzles, that being because they're hard-coded to be punished if they try to do so. Had it been Wheatley saying I still don't get it, it would have made more sense, but Sterling hasn't been portrayed as stupid yet, and so it seems weird that he wouldn't understand the puzzles after having watched them be completed hundreds of times. But I guess Sterling was missing that character trait, so we'll just add more onto the list and move on. After that exchange, the next chamber has a cool solution that once again requires us to juggle our single portal in a very creative way. Although I think limiting the player to only one portal throughout a large part of the game does cause an issue that I'll share with you in just a second, the level designers still did a fantastic job at making puzzles that played with the idea. The problem with only being able to shoot one portal is that something you can do when you have both is to use the portal gun to travel around the testing chambers lightning fast. It means that if you think up a solution that turns out to be wrong, or you mess up on a part of your plan, you can usually just teleport straight back to the beginning to retry the sequence. This only really works when you have access to both portals though. That isn't to say that the game shouldn't have focused on these blue portal-centric puzzles, as I think a lot of them are really good. It's just an observation I thought I'd make. Also, just look at this half-ruined button stuck in some rubble. It's such a minor detail, but I just love how the level designers went out of their way to make this in order to show how the chambers are barely holding together. In the next chamber, we finally gain access to the dual portal gun, which has a new ruined look. Then, once we finish the chamber and take the elevator down, it breaks halfway through and Sterling says this.
What's going on there? I can't see you from here.
So tell me, when can Sterling see us? Is it only through security cameras? Because so far, there were a lot of broken down areas with no working cameras. And also, if he can only see us on the cameras, why would he be complaining now that he couldn't see us during an elevator ride, when that must have then always been the case? A short time after, we reached yet another elevator and the end of chapter 3.
Whoa, wait a minute!
We're now introduced to turrets, and as in Portal 1, their introductory chamber is very light on puzzle elements. This first part of the chamber is solved using a storage cube, actually just sitting beside the button you're supposed to place it on. Two somewhat uneventful chambers later, and Sterling notes that he needs a human to activate the spire because starting it up requires you to complete a pretty complicated cognitive test for some reason. This is a joke, as the spire is activated just by the press of a button, and while I wouldn't say it's a good joke, I'm more concerned with the fact that this invalidates the need for Sterling to have gone through all the hassle to revive us. I understand that he doesn't have hands, but if we're gonna be real, of course he could have figured out a way to press the button without our help. Anyways, after completing another mediocre chamber, we once again bear witness to the spire, now covered in the orange rays of a setting sun. And once again, the environmental designers did a great job with this area. The fact that you can see the time of day progress throughout your time playing is just a wonderful detail. Sterling, for some reason, seems very surprised that we even made it this far.
We did it. We actually did it.
But we tread onwards. The next test we have to solve introduces my favorite feature in this mod, which is sadly criminally underused. It's the ability to turn off the power to disable machinery like doors, faith plates and emancipation grills, effectively warping the entire chamber into something completely different with the flick of a switch. I love this mechanic so much because it's so damn simple, yet causes you to think about everything in a new light. Some of the features advertised in this mod, such as the cleaning fields and the pneumatic diversity vent, which we'll cover later on, feel like pretty shallow mechanics to me, but just being able to turn on and off the power is just so creative and fun. Just look at the solution to this next chamber. You have to turn off the power so you can place a storage cube on a faith plate, then place your portals in the correct places before re-enabling the power so the cube is immediately flung through the portals. I love it! Finally, we reach the spire. Sterling has us run a test using a companion cube, which we then promptly incinerate, and he explains to us that the spire can be used to teleport matter around, like the portal gun, but with way fewer limitations. Then we're prompted to test out the device on ourselves to see how it interacts with organic matter. I don't understand why this is necessary, since Sterling seemingly doesn't need it to move any organic matter, but the plot must go on, so in we go. Sterling then says this.
Let's rebuild the central core. Oh, right. You probably know her as GLaDOS.
Well, I'm not sure I do, but even if I did, it seems like you're referring to me as if I had the mind of Shell, which maybe the player does because they've played the other Portal games, but which I, the player character, certainly doesn't. This is actually a recurring problem with the writing, especially later on when the plot demands that we already have a stern hatred towards GLaDOS, even though we might have never heard of her.
It's about time we bring her back, don't you think?
I don't know, probably would be good with someone in charge of this place, but you said that in a very cartoonishly evil voice, so I guess I should be trying to stop you. Sterling starts the test, but the spire malfunctions due to our portal gun causing interference, and we get teleported to a few places around Aperture before finally ending up in Old Aperture. Once we wake up, we realize that our portal gun is broken, so we'll have to walk. While I make my way through the start of this chapter, I want to ask you whether you think this game was made for new players or for people who've already played the other Portal games. I ask because Portal Revolution loves to place us in situations that we've already been in during Portal 2 and asks us to replay them as if we've never seen them before. We've already done the exploring Old Aperture, and while that doesn't mean Portal Revolution can't have some of its gameplay take place down here, It has to do something original to keep my interest, or it's just retreading the same old ground as Portal 2 did. I don't think this game was meant for new players. After all, you have to own Portal 2 in order to even play it, so I doubt this mod will be many people's first Portal experience. But why then have areas like these that don't offer a new experience? Of course this mod has plenty of original gameplay, but I think the developers could have made this into an even better experience had they thought about what their audience was going to be and whether they would enjoy each area of the mod. So far, the game has been pretty good at guiding the player on where to go using lighting and visual appeal, but it does miss the mark a few times during Old Aperture. Once we do figure out where to go, we're introduced to a new character over the speakers, a female announcer whose name we later learn is Emilia Conley.
Welcome to the Aperture Science Enrichment Center. How was that? Wrong draft? This fun? Lunch at 10. Wait, where are you going? Are we not finishing my part?
Emilia is voiced by Sarah Jacklin, and she's the only other voice character in the game apart from Sterling. In much the same way as Neil struggles, Jacklin has a hard time pinning down Emilia's character. At first, she seems like a slightly ignorant and clumsy, but well-intentioned young lady, but not much later she's already warped into a fearless and cocky sidekick. Like Neil, Jacklin also puts a bit too much emotion into Emilia's lines, making the actor shine through more than the character. With all that said, I still like Emilia's character, and I also think Miss Jacklin tried her best with the lines she was given. Shortly after Emilia's introduction, we obtain a new portal gun, this time one that fires a blue and a red portal. In a talk discussing the process of designing Portal Revolution, lead developer Stefan Heinz talks about people hoping to get access to a red portal when playing the game because the logo had a red portal on it. And so Stefan added it in very late into development to satisfy that audience.
When we released the trailer, people really liked the red portals. They said, this game better have red portals, otherwise I'm gonna, I don't know, do nothing. But yeah, then I thought, hey, let's add the red portals and make like a red portal gun.
Soon after we acquired the new portal gun, we were then introduced to the pneumatic diversity vent, a feature that was cut from Portal 2, hence why the chapter is not so subtly named the cutting room floor. And this game is actually a pretty good example of why this feature was cut. The first time the vent is introduced, we just use it to move a storage cube past an emancipation grill, which is sadly already reaching the limits of how it will be used in this mod. We also use it to clear a room of turrets, but I couldn't stop thinking how, if there had been no diversity vent in this chamber, the chamber wouldn't have played out much differently. It sucks because it's a visually appealing test element that's only ever used in a semi-interesting way once or twice. We then find the Personality Sphere maintenance labs, where we power on a personality core containing the memories of Emilia Conley. We pick her up and she lights our way through the nearby offices. She then says this.
Listen, I'm sorry for... Oh, I'm so sorry. My bad. I didn't mean to overexpose your eyes.
And never actually finishes her sentence. Guess it wasn't important enough to continue past the bit. Emilia opens the door for us while trying to cope with the fact that Aperture is falling to pieces, and we take an elevator to the next chapter. In the next chamber, Emilia explains to us that she used to be an Aperture Science employee working as a neuroscientist at the company's research group for artificial intelligence. She shuffles through some company files, realizing that GLaDOS killed everyone. Then she says this.
I need to process this for a bit and figure out what to do now. See you in a bit.
Bit. But seriously, I think the screenwriter did a really strange thing with Emilia's character here. From now on and for the rest of the game, she'll keep insisting that Aperture are bad guys, Caroline was scanned against her will, and the creation of GLaDOS was obviously a bad idea. But Emilia was an employee at Aperture. She worked on GLaDOS, presumably willingly, and according to Soma logic, the time between her being scanned and awakening here with you was as brief as the blink of an eye, meaning she's changed her entire stance on Aperture in the blink of an eye. That just feels so incredibly contrived. Especially because later on, she expresses vehement hatred towards GLaDOS, the project she was getting ready to work on hours prior. The funniest part of this is that, later when we try to stop Sterling from reviving GLaDOS, neither we, the player, nor Emilia has ever actually interacted with her. And so it just feels strange that the entire plot of the latter half of the game is Emilia and the player trying with all of their might to stop GLaDOS from being brought back. Also, even though this was my second playthrough, it took me a while to realize that this wall would open up and let me through once I got close enough to it, because it had no visual appeal. A bit later we reach this area, where we have to cover the entire place in conversion gel to reach a higher elevation and escape. And once again, this feels like something I already did in Portal 2, repeated here with almost no variation, and so it gets a bit boring. The next chamber is pretty good, although what really struck me when playing it was the track that plays in the background. Take a listen. The soundtrack has so far been decent, but this one track named Komplementar really stood out to me and was just phenomenal to listen to while testing. The final puzzle of the chapter is pretty well made, but notice how the diversity event isn't really used as part of the puzzle, but just to move the player from one place to another. It could have easily just been replaced with a faith plate, and that's a bit sad.
Hey, I need you to carry me up the elevator. We've done this before, so be ready to catch me. We're becoming quite good at this.
We're now back to the place where we first saw the spire, but now it's nighttime and the moon can be seen in the distance. Not only do I love this view, but even though we've already been in this area before, it doesn't feel cheaply reused, as we have to go a different way than we did our first time through. It makes Aperture feel more believable, as if any wall were to collapse, there'd be a different part of the facility behind it. Once again speaking to this mod's great visual and environmental design. Anyway, Sterling and Emilia are introduced to one another, and Sterling has more or less decided that he's evil now, because the blood desperately demanded a villain.
Tell you what, why don't you come back and join me here in the spire? Charging up the teleporter as we speak to continue our mission, you so rudely interrupted.
Being mean for the sake of being mean, my favorite villain archetype. After this exchange, we're introduced to a new laser cube variant, which, apart from the ability to turn off the power, oh how I missed that, is the only other interesting mechanic introduced in this game. The cubes always come in pairs, and once one of them is hit by a laser, the laser will shoot out of the other one. It's actually a pretty cool idea that was apparently also a scrap feature from Portal 2, but I will say that it didn't really feel as if the level designers were able to use it to its full potential. Nevertheless, it's nice with a new mechanic, so I'll stop complaining now.
I don't blame you for helping him. You didn't see what she did. I mean, neither did I, but the records are disturbing.
It's clear that the writer hadn't thought this motive through at all, and I just find it so silly how Emilia, who made GLaDOS by the way, is trying to hype her up as such a villain, and how could we ever help bring her back, because 5 minutes earlier she learned that GLaDOS killed everyone. I understand that that should be enough to encourage you not to let Sterling revive her, but the way Emilia talks about how bad GLaDOS was, like she was actually there to experience her taking over the facility while we were not, is just so pretentious. I'm also a bit confused by this chamber. You can activate one laser with another, which just seems like a joke, as you don't need to in order to complete the test.
Hey, I've got a question. Your new little blue friend, who is she? The voice seems familiar. Alright, you can't respond.
I can't, or I won't. You don't know. I believe it's actually canon that Chell simply chooses not to speak, so I don't understand why Sterling assumes we can't talk and aren't just refusing to. This chamber is also an example of how the designers aren't using the cubes to their full potential, as you could have replaced them with a regular redirection cube, and the puzzle almost wouldn't have changed at all. The last real chamber in this entire mod is okay. I'm actually only realizing now as I write the script that it utilizes almost every single puzzle element we're introduced to throughout the game, which is cool I guess. I think the reason I hadn't realized before after I'd played through the game twice is because the chamber doesn't utilize the elements all that well. The worst offender is the laser cubes, which could have been swapped out for a regular storage cube and a button, and the chamber would have been no different for it. I think that's sad, and I wish the team had found a way to force us to think critically about all of its new puzzle elements. Also, the chamber doesn't include my favorite puzzle element, the power switch, which could have made it a much better final test. After we complete the puzzle, Emilia brings us straight to the spire using a final elevator, and the chapter concludes.
So, I have decided. You betrayed me. Twice. I have given you enough chances. Something tells me that your new little friend managed to turn you against me, so I'm just going to kill you. Now!
You know what this dialogue sounds like to me? It sounds like someone mocking a villain's plot for being poorly written. But no, it's actually the villain's motive in this mod. Damn. Don't get me wrong, at this point in the mod I really do hate Sterling's character. But not because I have any good in-universe reason to. He's just annoying. Really, really annoying. Alright, moving on.
Wait, did he say his name was Sterling? I built a vacuum cleaner once. Called the little guy Sterling?
Yep, this is an actual plot point. And how convenient that the only two cores we meet in this game just so happen to be integrally connected. We reach the spire, and while I make my way inside, let me do a quick recap of the story. We are a female test subject who has given a maniac core too much power for his own good. We're then sent down to the bottom of Aperture Science and have to make our way back up with the help of a female robot to confront the power-mad personality core, enter his lair and destroy him. I think I'm just gonna leave you with that. Once we finally reach the spire's control room, entering through the same incinerator we used to destroy the companion cube earlier, We press a big red button to start the final boss fight. To win, we have to press 4 buttons located in different parts of the spire to shut it down before we die. However, before we get to that, listen to Amelia say this.
Is it possible that you were once a vacuum cleaner?
How do you know that?
I can't believe it. Oh, they grow up so fast. It's not polite to murder your mother.
Do you remember when Amelia used to be the sweet but clumsy scientist back at Old Aperture? Does this play into that role? Clumsy but extremely confident? I guess that's her personality. At least it's more well defined than Sterling's. But in any case, she seems way too calm for this hectic situation. She then summons a claw from the ceiling because she has that power, and we attach her to it as she goes to
explore this magnificent vent.
Alright, I guess. Have fun with that. There's something about this last sequence that I really like. Not because it's super well designed, although the gameplay isn't too bad. Just listening to both of the voice actors doing their best with the poorly written lines they were given is just kinda sweet. They're like two children on a playground imitating the hero and the villain of their own make-believe story.
Here you are. You're just back now? Where have you been?
What are you talking about?
I didn't see you again after you upgraded my chassis. We used to do everything together.
Are you having abandonment issues right now?
Finally, we press the last button, and everything is consumed in a bright white light. After the credits roll, we get a last sequel-baiting cutscene of Amelia trying to keep us alive after we were badly wounded when the spire was teleported to the moon, and the game is over for good. And so, I return to my original question. Why is the mod named Portal Revolution? Neither the wiki nor the talk with Heinz I referenced earlier seems to give a clear answer, but I think this Reddit comment sums it up perfectly. Who knows? Stefan picked that name a very long time ago when the story was different. It was never changed and soon became too late to change. In conclusion, I like Portal Revolution. I think I even like it more than I did before I set out to make this critique. I like it because it has a beautiful aesthetic and a few really phenomenal test chambers, but I mostly like it because even though it's extremely flawed, especially in terms of story and character, it almost never feels lazy. It really tries to do the best thing it can. I just wish it knew what that thing was. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video game analysis, so I appreciate you sticking all the way through, even though I'm still in the process of figuring out what even makes a good game critique. Because this video was more of a proof of concept than anything, I want you to go to the comment section and write me a brutally honest criticism on how I did something wrong or said something stupid, so that I can hopefully avoid repeating that mistake in the future. I'll try my best to respond to every single comment. Have a lovely day.